குணால்
சரி.
கேக்குதா? ஹலோ,
கேக்குது சார்.
வாய்ஸ் கேக்குதா?
கேக்குது சார்.
ஒன்றையும் இவ்வளவு ரொம்ப ஸ்லோவா கேக்குது.
இப்போ சார்
ஓகே
சார். யூடியூப் போதா?
கோஹோஸ்ட் பண்ணேனா? சொல்லுங்க.
கேக்குறதா?
கேக்குது.
ஓகே.
ஓகே. பண்ணுங்க. Good morning, Sharmila ma'am. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm just trying to get the screen right. Just give me a minute.
Yes, ma'am.
இது கொஞ்சம் சவுண்ட் ரொம்ப லோவா இருக்கு. சவுண்ட் இன்க்ரீஸ் பண்ணுங்க உங்க சைடுல.
ஒரு நிமிஷம். குணாலன் அது என்னன்னு பாரு. குணாலன் என் வாய்ஸ் லோவா கேக்குதா? இல்லையே, இதுல நான் ஃபுல்லா தான் வச்சிருக்கேன்.
I'll start the video whenever you tell me to.
Yes, ma'am. You can switch on the video. We'll just see.
Okay.
I think you have to tilt your. You're in laptop, ma'am.
Yeah, is it okay now?
No, you have to tilt a little bit. Only your.
One moment. This is better?
No, a little bit. More, above your head, a lot of space is seen.
1 second.
ஜெசிகன் கேக்குறதா நான் பேசுறது உங்களுக்கு?
கேக்குறது.
நீங்க பேசுறது எனக்கு கேக்குறது ரொம்ப லோவா இருக்கு.
கேட்கலையா? உங்களோட இதுல லேப்டாப்ல இது ஆடியோ செக் பண்ணுங்க.
தேசிகன்
சொல்லுங்க.
கேக்குறதா?
கேக்குறது. இந்த வாய்ஸ் கேக்குதா உங்களுக்கு?
எனக்கு இப்ப கேக்குறது. முன்னாடி லேப்டாப்ல போட்டா ரொம்ப லோவா வந்தது. இப்ப ஐ புட் இட் ஆன் செல்போன்.
ஓகே.
கரெக்டா இருக்கு.
Sharmila ma'am is here.
Okay. Hello, Sharmila.
Morning, sir.
Good morning. After a long time, we are able to get you. Very
No,
nice.
yes, sir. After a long time, I'm seeing you, sir. It's been years.
Good. So nice. Everybody expecting it is. This will be the. I hope this will be the first of the lectures, not your first lecture.
I hope they don't fall asleep on a Sunday morning, sir.
Yeah, very nice. Good. How long you will present? Then we can have.
Sir, according to what Mr. Desikan has sent me, it's 1 hour and then followed by a Q&A. But I'm flexible because I've got, various things I'll introduce them to, which will just sort of broaden their thinking.
You don't have pressure of time.
Okay.
Okay, then we will have a question and answer session.
Yes, sir.
Very good. How is your mother?
Not great, sir.
Okay, okay.
It's taking a long time, but sort of sinking every day.
Okay, I think I should make
I'll
a.
talk to you later about that, sir.
Okay, fine. This again? Hey, this again?
சொல்லுங்க
எப்ப ஆரம்பிக்கணுமோ சொல்லுங்க, I will start.
just
You will
people are
start,
joining.
then I will give the introduction of Sharmila.
Yeah, people are joining.
Okay.
Invocation எல்லாம் முடிச்சிட்டு we will come to you.
Okay, fine. You want to listen to this or?
Ma'am, I will. Can we see your video? I'll make it full screen.
There you go.
1 minute. குணாலன் இந்த இது குணாலன் ஸ்டாப் ஷேரிங் கொடு. Can you just adjust a little bit?
I think that's the best. Anyway, they won't be looking at me. They'll be looking at the presentation. Don't worry about my face too much.
Okay.
I'm very camera shy also.
Oh, okay. And some of our students are sitting in the classroom.
So how many do you have in all?
Pardon, ma'am?
How many students in all? Total.
In all, we have more than 50 students now.
Okay.
And we are expecting people from outsiders also will join.
Okay.
We have more than 150 registrations.
And English is okay, right?
Yeah.
Hari Om, good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, Ji.
Yeah. There was a failure. Just now the power came on.
Sharmila ma'am, this is Damodaran ji. He is our director.
Morning, Mr. Damodaran. Morning.
Namaskar, Sharmila ma'am and Damodaran.
Thank you for inviting me.
Ramohanji joined, huh?
Amama is also there.
It's also there. Hari Om, sir. Good morning.
Sharmila ma'am, people are just joining. We will wait for 2-3 minutes more, and we have some students sitting in the classroom and watching.
Yeah.
The
No,
screen.
don't rush. I'm ready whenever you tell.
Yeah.
Jessican,
Yes.
we are recording this, no?
Yeah, we are recording this.
Okay.
Okay.
Shall we start?
Yeah, please.
Ramoji,
Hello?
start பண்ணலாம் இல்லையா?
Ramonji, let's start.
No, I thought you were starting with prayer.
Yes.
We'll start. That's what I'm asking. Are you
Yeah,
there?
so I am ready.
Right. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session. We will start with an invocation. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Good morning once again. We will just play a small video, then we will get into the session. Nolan?
The Chinmaya Academy for Civil Services is a unit of the Madras Chinmaya Seva Trust under Chinmaya.
Hari Om.
Nolan?
The Chinmaya Academy for Civil Services is a unit of the Madras Chinmaya Seva Trust under Chinmaya Mission. Chinmaya Academy for Civil Services is motivated by its continuous commitment for nurturing excellence to create a band of committed and capable civil servants.
Chinmaya Academy for Civil Services was launched by Chinmaya Mission in 2017, which is a non-profit organization. Chinmaya Mission is a global organization which has got over 300 centers across the world. Hospitals, schools, colleges, university across India. We are there in the education field for more than 50 years.
Get the guidance and support of a galaxy of experienced former bureaucrats, academicians, and leaders in various arenas in the former except guest lecturers. We at Chinmaya IAS Academy understand the structure of the UPSC Civil Services examination, need of our students well, and give them personalized attention. We implement proven strategies to help our students face the exams with confidence. Highlights of our offline course include limited number of students per class, direct engagement, individual mentor support, expert guidance, consistent interaction, updated course, study materials, result-oriented coaching and training, daily tests and doubt clarification sessions and results materials.
You need to get into an institute like ours to hone in your skills, to understand your strengths and weaknesses, so that you can build on your strengths and take proactive steps to tide over your weak spots.
Chinmaya IAS Academy is equipped with good infrastructure that is complemented by goal-oriented teaching methodologies and interactive training materials like videos and presentations.
Apart from IAS coaching, our youth empowerment sessions, Key to Success program help the students to manage their stress, manage their time, to deal with the emotions, inculcate the leadership qualities in them.
We impart the essence of Indian knowledge and traditions of our culture. Chinmaya IAS Academy, empowering minds to lead and serve.
Thank you, Gunalan. So may I request our Mr. Damodaran, our director, Chinmaya Academy for Civil Services, to give the welcome address and the opening remarks.
Hari Om, Chinmaya Sadguruve Namaha. Good morning, Vanakkam. Respected Madam Sharmila ji, IRAS retired, former principal financial advisor of Northern Railways, and former Joint Secretary Infrastructure, Government of India, who is here as our esteemed guest speaker to talk on the topic of infrastructure development in India. I also welcome Dr. S. Ramohan ji, IRAS retired, former Special Secretary Railways, Government of India, and our academic committee member, Chinmaya IAS Academy. Shri Manikandan ji, Principal, Shri Desikan, Chief Coordinator, our faculty, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Chinmaya Academy for Civil Services, I extend a very warm and hearty welcome to all of you for this special guest lecture program. As you all know, infrastructure, you are all familiar with the name. It refers to the very basic systems and services that are available and necessary for a country. And it could be buildings, it could be transportation, rail, road, air, or shipping, water supply, power supply, communication, etc. Now, we are having a very nice level of infrastructure today. Let's just look back how we were. Maybe 1,000 years back also, India, Bharat had a well-developed infrastructure, commensurate with the technology at that level. They had roads, they had bridges, ship, boats, and other things to travel across the country, and also to travel to other countries like Rajendra Chola went up to Singapore and other areas and established his sovereignty over all those places. So around that time, maybe Rajaraja Chola's time, we may have had around 30% of the world population, and our GDP also, people estimate and say that was almost 30% of the world GDP. But subsequently, after the invasions by the Muslims and the Christians thereafter, our GDP did not grow much, and our share in the world GDP also came down drastically, and our standard of living also started falling down. Better records are available during the British rule, say around 1820, our GDP was 16% of the global GDP, whereas by 1870, after 50 years, it had fallen to 12%. And we as an independent nation have to look at the GDP of India in 1947. It was just 4% of the global GDP. From where we were, almost 1/3 or 50% of the global GDP which we handled, we came down to a measly 4%. So India was called a poor nation in 1947, about 75, 77 years back. It is a nation for which the Europeans were searching for sea routes. From such an advanced country, we became an underdeveloped nation due to lack of self-rule and because of foreign invasions and foreign rules, etc. So as a developing nation in 1947, we had a lot of requirements to grow, industrial growth and social growth, etc. But then we had very little funds, very little resources. So India had to ration out the funds amongst competing demands: the food and agriculture, healthcare, education, dams, communication, energy, transport, and all such infrastructure. Most of you do not know the problems faced by your parents and grandparents as India developed. If you have some time, most of you, I believe, or I guess, that would have been born around 2095 or 2000 or so. So you have been experiencing a fairly well-developed infrastructure in India. But then 75 years ago, it was not like that. When I passed out and when my first assignment was in 1976 as a trainee engineer in Engineers India Limited. It was posted at Mathura Refinery Project in UP. At that time, all my seniors used to say, this is the last refinery we are constructing, after which there would not be any order. And after 3-4 years, we would lose our jobs. This was the scenario. But what happened afterwards? The next 25 years, we doubled our refining capacity. Now, 77 years after independence, do you know the refining capacity today? More than 5 times. It's 250 million tons per annum today. And we are now largest traders. We don't have much of crude oil. We import, refine, and export. All this is possible because of rapid infrastructural development. And I also, looking back, I would give another example, the way the rationing out of the budget or the resources at that time, what we faced. In 1985, Mumbai-Pune pipeline for transporting oil, petrol, diesel, kerosene from Mumbai refinery. There were 2 refineries. There are still 2 refineries in Mumbai. From there, it has to be moved out. A pipeline was suggested by Hindustan Petroleum. But then when the Petroleum Ministry went to the Planning Commission, the Railways Ministry objected. They said that for the cost that they are incurring in setting up a pipeline, we can put another 2 railway tracks, and that will be a multimodal transport. Apart from oil, one can transport goods and one can transport people, like that. Anyway, government sanctioned additional tracks also and sanctioned the pipeline also. At that time, a kind of a compromise was made, because when a tank wagon goes, it has to be brought back as an empty wagon, whereas in a pipeline, and that problem is not there. That was the kind of the kind of resource scarcity which India was facing. Now 77 years, it was midpoint after the independence from that time. Now, in 1992, I read in the newspapers our technological prowess and how we were being treated. Even though we were doing rapid strides in space sector and in nuclear sector, in other sectors, we were not doing all that well. In 1992, I felt very sad when I read the newspapers, when I read this news item. Our TVS group of company, I think it is Sundaram Fasteners in Padi, they announced that they have got an export order. You know, in all the cars, you have radiators. All the IC engines have to have a cooler, so radiator will be there. So they got an order, not for the radiator. Believe me, they got an order from General Motors for manufacture of the radiator cap. And the radiator cap was to be manufactured by this company and exported. This was termed as a great engineering prowess of Indians. I felt as an engineer, it was a utter humiliation. Anyway, from there, where we are today. Now, Tatas are setting up Jaguar Land Rover, one of the prestigious cars in the world. It's going to be produced here. Already we are producing Benz, we are producing BMW, Audi, and other cars. And we are producing Suzuki cars in India and exporting back to Japan. So a lot of developments have taken place, growth and all this. Things happen because of, though we have many such achievements in India, all these things have happened because in an overall sense, we have created infrastructures in almost all the verticals. Whether it is railways with our own Vande Bharat and other things, whether it is roads, we have got excellent road network, healthcare. Now, a lot of people from other countries are coming to India to get treated and get back, health tourism as they call it. Pharmaceuticals, in pandemic, we exported vaccines to other countries. So like that, in almost all the verticals we have developed, and this development has an underlying layer of tremendous amount of infrastructural development, which we do not see when we just pass through. So this infrastructure is a backbone of the country, and it plays a major and vital role. And I'm very happy that Madam Chinmaya ji, who was Joint Secretary Infrastructure in Government of India, is here to talk to you about the infrastructure. As IAS aspirants, what Madam is going to talk will be very much useful and relevant for you. And with that, I request Dr. Ramohan ji to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you. Hari Om.
Good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Ramonji?
Good morning to everybody.
Yes,
Are
yes,
you able
good
to
morning.
hear?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
very good. Yeah. So now I am supposed to introduce Sharmila Chawali, the speaker of today. When a very small reference, when Kalidasa wrote Raghuvamsam, he said that this is a story of Rama, the greatest story ever told. And he says, how can you tell the story of Rama in such a short time, in a few thousand verses? He gives an example. Vuddabe nasti sagaram. You won't be able to cover the ocean with a catamaran, with a hand boat. Likewise, the story of Rama cannot be covered in a few chapters. Anyway, I will try. Telling about Sharmila Chawali is also Vuddabe nasti sagaram. It is not possible to talk about her and her achievements, her qualities. And I may not be competent in other things, but I am very competent to talk about Sharmila. I know her for the past several years. One of the most remarkable civil servant, officer, administrator, and a human being. She has got expertise in several fields. Then she belongs to, tell it in a short word, Sharmila belongs to 1986 batch of the IRAS. She last served as advisor, National Institute of Smart Government, not small government, smart government. She has worked in the ministries of Railway and Finance in the Government of India. She was Joint Secretary Infrastructure, which is our topic for today. Very important, as Damodaran ji has said. It's one of the most vital things which Government of India is looking forward to, infrastructure development. She led the setting up of the IITs, revamped REIT. These are all abbreviations. To expand this abbreviation takes longer time. And the municipal bond, infrastructure credit rating scheme, the credit entertainment enhancement funds, many other things. She was also a member secretary of the committee for revamping PPP. PPP means may not be, some of you may not be aware, public-private partnership. Previously, it was only public sector. Other countries had capitalist governments had private sector. Government of India thought of public sector. Then it required greater funds, greater participation from people. So the PPP scheme was introduced. Public-private partnership. Both government and private sector participate. And it is one of the vital sectors of Indian economic development, infrastructure development. She held a very important post of member secretary of the Committee for Revamping PPP. She has served as a director on the boards of OVL. They're all company names, IIFCL and IRFC, and as India's representative on the G20 Infrastructure Working Group. Another most important post. G20, you know, G20 group was one of the important areas of international economic development and cooperation. She was a working group member of the G20. Her areas of expertise include infrastructure finance, PPCs, sustainable finance, foreign exchange management, and multilateral and bilateral loan negotiations with several countries. She had traveled several times abroad. She had discussions with several important economic systems of the world, and she has been an asset to management in the finance ministry, and I was very happy to introduce her. Apart from all these things, which are all economic and development issues, she was an excellent human being. Her care for the animal welfare is very remarkable. No dog can go away in Hyderabad if it is sick till it is attended to by Sharmila. Such a person with a lot of human care, animal care, everything. And their care extends to infrastructure development also. So I am very happy that she has come here today. As I said, I know her for a long time. So if I am allowed to speak, the whole time will be taken up by talking about her. But we have to talk about development finance. So only thing is, all of you be totally attentive, and then please ask questions. Because all the answers are already within you, but it has to be brought out. It can be brought out only by a very intelligent person like Sharmila giving a talk about that, and you are responding to it with your questioning ability. I'm looking forward to such a session myself, because I belong to the Jurassic age of administration. She is comparatively younger, so she knows more about this. I'm looking forward. So Sharmila, go ahead.
Thank you for those very kind words, sir. I've known Dr. Ram Mohan. I think I first met him when I was in my first year of posting, 2 years after probation, after 2 years of probation, and he's been a mentor and a guide for me throughout my service. And 90% of what he said is an exaggeration, so you can ignore it. I also thank you to the Chinmaya Academy for inviting me, and to Mr. Desikan for making all the arrangements. I know this is a Sunday morning, and a lot of you don't want to be burdened by a lot of statistics. So my talk today isn't going to be, we had so many kilometers of roads, we now have so many kilometers. These are the number of kilometers of roads being built. These are the ports being built. All that is very easily available on the net and in all the guides that you use for your civil service preparation. So I'm not getting into that. I'm going into something which is the understanding of infrastructure. Mr. Damodaran spoke briefly about it. India had, maybe 2000 years ago, a hoary past where we were very developed, and I think in the Mohenjo-daro area, even today, people marvel at the structures that were built. Infrastructure is basically the underlying, and we did at one point have skills in it. When we talk of the infrastructure that is available in India today, the physical infrastructure, normally we go back to Shesha Suri, who started the Grand Trunk Road, and he was remarkably prescient at that time. The entire Grand Trunk Road, on both sides, it had trees with canopies. So wherever you traveled on that, you had shade. And India has a punishingly hot summer. So it was very, very remarkable that he thought of it at that point. Nowadays, we don't do that. We build highways, but we don't think of that kind of a natural canopy which protects us from the heat. Why is this? What has happened over the years that has made us not realize what is required of infrastructure which provides service to us? We are the ones who, we are the first to criticize the railways if tracks are not good. If you see a pothole on the road, etc., we criticize it. And it's actually not rocket science. Why is it so difficult to have a good road? So what I want to get into a little bit is in the structure that I'm going to follow now. Mr. Deskan, the first slide. I will define infrastructure in general terms, so that whenever you say infrastructure, you'll be talking with a little more knowledge than the standard person who talks. The next slide, please. The standard person who talks about infrastructure. Then I will get into what are the problems of financing of infrastructure. What is the thing that is being used by the government? What are the approaches that it has taken? And then we'll end with Q&A. The presentation is extremely short. I think it's only about 6 slides, so you don't have to worry too much about it. Let's go into the definition of infrastructure. Why do we need to define infrastructure? Infra, you people know about the spectrum, ultraviolet and infrared. Infra is at one end of the spectrum. Infrastructure is the underlying structure. There are 2 types of infrastructure. One is the social sector infrastructure. The other is the physical sector. We have a third one which has come up in the last 10 to 15 years, which is the digital infrastructure, which also includes things like the data centers. I'll touch on that briefly at the end. The problem with what not defining infrastructure struck India in a very peculiar way. As Mr. Damodaran pointed out, we were very public sector oriented. When we got independence, we were a country that had moved during the period of colonialism from something that was one of the major GDP leaders in the world to something that became a poor country. That is what happened in India. But colonialism also got us something like the railways. Any of you who read about economic developments in India know that the British wanted the railways so that they could move raw material from India to Britain, whether it's the cotton or whatever those the industries that powered the later years of the Industrial Revolution. With the public sector funding this after independence, the majority of the people who were into infrastructure looked at the public sector banks for finance. We also had other sectors. We had the banks, we had the stock market, we have the insurance sector, we have other agencies in India. Because there was no definition, every agency, every regulator used his or her own definition of infrastructure. So if I went, for instance, to the Reserve Bank and asked for something which is slotted into the definition of infrastructure, that definition wouldn't necessarily be something that SEBI or IRDA would follow. There was confusion. And this hurt the ease of doing business. People would have heard of that. Ease of doing business is when things are seamless as far as possible. When anyone who's coming in to get into something finds that things are very easy. Unfortunately, with no definition of infrastructure, it was a nightmare. And people could also game the system by using certain sectors which weren't strictly infrastructure to get access to funds which were meant for hardcore infrastructure. 25 years ago, Dr. Rangarajan, he was tasked with the responsibility of defining infrastructure. He's a very erudite man and very experienced in this and in finance. He came up with something called the Harmonized List of Infrastructure Sectors. The characteristics he took were the basic 6 characteristics. They're on the screen just now, you can see. Infrastructure is a natural monopoly. That's the basic thing. Normally, infrastructure is provided by the government. The government gives it to its citizens, the kind of infrastructure that is used by the public. If I, as a private sector person, build a small road from, say, my factory to my house in my colony, that is not public infrastructure. We are talking only in this talk only of public infrastructure, which is a natural monopoly, in that if roads are provided, there's no competing force which is going to come and provide another road for the public. The other definitions are very easy to understand, the high sunk costs, etc. You can read those up and you can even Google them if you don't understand the basic meanings. But one of the things is externalities. This is very important in infrastructure. Externality is when something has an effect outside its own jurisdiction. The provision of a road, for instance. You must have heard about this when you're studying about India's economic development. The provision of roads in rural areas does 2 things immediately. It improves connectivity and flow of even information. But more important, you see a sea change in the development characteristics of the women. With roads, when they're accessible, women's education, women's minds, etc., there you see an effect. This is called a positive externality. Sometimes you have negative externalities also, but the basic thing you have to remember is infrastructure has an external impact. The other things that the other parameters that Dr. Rangarajan used is 3 things that are fairly important in the development cycle that India at that point was and still is. How is it that these sectors have developed in India? How do they contribute to the growth of human capital? And how important are they to the growth of the economy? Taking this, there's something called the Harmonized List of Infrastructure, which was put out by the Ministry of Finance. This is reviewed from time to time. This is the list that is used by all the regulators. You may be aware that the public sector banks have something called directed lending. They're required to lend to certain sectors. It's in rural areas, and like rural sector lending, etc. One carve-out that they have in lending is for infrastructure. They're required to put a certain amount of loans into the infrastructure sector. These loans are accessed by people who are coming and either investing, or there's a construction person who's looking for a loan for something. They access the loans in the infrastructure carve-out. The major sectors in this, the harmonized list is on the internet. You can go through it. It's revised from year to year. The importance of this is because whether you look at transport, you look at education, you look at social sector and physical sector, once you are there, you get access to longer term loans. You get access to not as expensive as a loan as, say, a corporate sector would get. And the most important thing it does is it makes a distinction between infrastructure and manufacturing. Why is this important? You know, when you build a factory, I say I'm going to build a factory. I have the land. I know what I'm going to produce. I set up the factory. I get the equipment and I start producing. Once all my teething problems are over, once I start producing, I can immediately start selling. So my marketing becomes very important. That means if I'm setting up a factory and I know that it's going to come up in, say, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, at the end of that time, if everything goes to plan, I can start manufacturing and selling, and that is my revenue stream. So when I take a loan for manufacturing, normally my loans are pari passu with the how the construction is done of setting up my factory. And after that, I start repaying based on my sales. If it's not doing well, then I sink. But if it's doing well, that's how my profits, etc., come in. On the other hand, interest. So it's a basic thing is for a lender, a bank manager who's looking at a request for a loan, it's very easy to assess how this factory is going to do. He will just have to check what is the market going to be like, what is the credibility of the person who's taking the loan, what is the equipment and the construction stuff that is needed, and how easily is it accessible. And on the basis of that, he will put in the risk factors and he'll give a loan rate and he'll take it. Infrastructure is very different. When I build an infrastructure asset, often it precedes the demand. That is, when I build a road, it is not necessary that the road is going to carry the same number of passengers or travelers on the road that it will 10 to 20 years ago, 20 years from now. One of the first things you learn in transport geography and transport economics is any prediction or forecast of usage of infrastructure is wrong. You can never get it right because you don't know how people are going to behave. I'll go back to the example of a road again. When I build a road, it connects points A and B. There are other roads also. There's a trunk road, there's some side roads, there's some bridges, there's some informal roads that are used, etc. For the road to stabilize and to develop a pattern of users, it takes time. This time is not predictable. In certain areas, it can take 2 to 3 years. Second, an infrastructure asset itself has to stabilize. You build a road, it has to go through a cycle of a summer, a winter, a monsoon, etc., to see how good the road is. Infrastructure technology is sufficiently advanced right now. Mr. Damodaran had referred to how bad he felt about reading about some things that were very basic that were being manufactured, and we had the wherewithal to do something more advanced. In infrastructure today, construction technology has become a science. At every stage of construction, there are advanced techniques. AI is very, very active in this. So it is reasonable to assume that the infrastructure asset that you build is going to be good. For it to stabilize, I don't mean that with the first monsoon, you're going to develop potholes. That's bad. That's badly constructed infrastructure. But what would happen is, after 1 or 2 monsoons or after winters or in the desert climate, what happens is the substructure of a road, it has to settle. So sometimes it takes time, and it gets the infrastructure asset normally in such kind of things takes about 1 or 12 months to 15 months to actually stabilize. During the period when it stabilizes, the returns don't come in immediately. You have to have people coming in. If it is government funded, like our old infrastructure was, there's no problem. You don't have to worry about loans or lending, etc. But since we don't have enough resources, we are calling in people to come in with their money to build us the infrastructure, and they have to pay back their loans. This is important for the bankers because they will be hanged if they don't get their loans back, repayment back. But it's also important for the person who's doing this construction because initially he or she is not going to have enough cash flows to service this. So what do we look at? We look at the different ways of, can I have the next slide, please? We look at the different ways that we can finance infrastructure. Initially, the basic infrastructure that was provided by the government was the public roads, the highways, ports, etc. They were done entirely through the public sector. This meant that because of the competing demands in the economy, certain other sectors were neglected because we just didn't have enough funds. Whether it was healthcare, whether it was education, the basic, at that time, the planners thought, let's have the basic heavy infrastructure, the roads, etc., to provide connectivity. And maybe at that point, if we go back in history, we would take the same decision when you have competing demands for very limited resources. Certain departments like the railways and the posts also used to generate their own resources. At one point, the railways used to generate a substantial amount to finance a lot of its own infrastructure development. Over the years, because of various things that have happened, including in the social burden that the infrastructure has railways have had to pay, that kept dwindling. Same thing happened in ports, etc. The effect of this is, I need a road from point A to B, but the policy planners decide that maybe point C to D is more important when I have a limited amount of money. That by itself looks like a zero-sum game. A didn't get it, B got it. And then a few years later, I can give it to A. Unfortunately, this isn't how it works. Every time we deny ourselves a piece of public infrastructure, we are setting back our development by that much, whether it's access to a factory, it's access to public transport, it's access to markets, etc. We are also adding to the cost of the infrastructure. We have inflation. So with delays, with time delays, the cost escalates. So this started snowballing. It got to a point when it was daunting to look at the amount of infrastructure that we needed in India to push it, get it, make that quantum leap to another level, to push it from a poor country to what we are today. That's an emerging market, which is a notch above a poor or developing country. When we saw this, we were also at the same time conscious of what was happening around us. When I tweet, I'm on the social media, I only tweet about infrastructure. One of the things that I do a lot is I tweet a lot about China. People wonder why. I always say that as an emerging economy, which is looking over its shoulder and trying fast to gallop through all the cycles of development to reach a higher level, we should always compare ourselves with the best. If we compare ourselves with the best, then we know that we are not good enough and we should do more. What China has done is absolutely remarkable. Years of strategic planning and innovation, with one difference, it isn't a command economy. What one person decides seems to be what everyone decides. But when you look at China, and I study China a lot, you find that within China, There are also competing demands. There is also a fair amount of autonomy, which most of us don't know about at the local level. The current financial crisis that China seems to be facing comes a lot from the local municipalities and the local regions borrowing on their own, trying to find finances on their own, etc. In India, we didn't have that because most of the money was coming from either the state budget or the central budget. Before China came into this cycle where it's sort of leapfrogged so many basic stages and become one of the most infrastructurally advanced, if not the most infrastructurally advanced economy in the world. At that stage, there was a stage when China and India were on par. About 25 years ago, when we realized that we were going to be competing with the Chinas of the world, we were also competing with the advanced economies in terms of the trade that we needed to do. We saw that we needed infrastructure. So we said, how do we start financing this infrastructure? That's what Dr. Ramohan had spoken with public-private partnerships. We started looking at ways in which we could finance outside of the conventional budgetary and internal resource side. One of the things that we decided is, let's set up dedicated public sector units like the NHAI, the Indian Railway Finance Corporation, the IRFC, the Power Finance Corporation, etc., which will go out and borrow funds from the market for those sectors, specialized sectors. We also heavily went into borrowing from the multilateral and bilateral agencies. Multilateral development banks are the World Bank, the ADB, etc. Bilateral are the countries that we take money from. There was a stage when we had bilateral funds coming in from all over the world, including, all over the developed world, including Scandinavian countries, etc. But around 2002 or 2003, the finance minister, Mr. Jaswant Singh, took a call saying that the overhead, the transaction costs of borrowing, getting small amounts of money from, say, a Sweden or a Norway, etc., our transaction costs in India are so high that the government doesn't need to get into it. If they want to give money, let them go to the NGO sector. We will have arrangements only with those who give a minimum of $100 million a year. So I think the next slide will talk briefly about how we went into that kind of a thing. The multilaterals are the banks. The bilaterals are the ones that the countries, country-to-country relationship. India is such an enormous country like China that whatever we get from the outside is a drop in the bucket. I've put up a slide. This is accessible. I've given you the link at the bottom of the slide. This is accessible on the web. Whatever the multilateral loans that we get, and we've taken huge loans from the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank, they're very, very small. LT is long-term, that is external debt that is more than 1 year. We have very little short-term debt. So that is why India has never defaulted on a sovereign debt that the government has taken. These multilateral and bilateral statistics that are shown here are those that are taken by the government. According to the Constitution of India and the allocation of subjects given to the center and the states, external borrowing is limited to this Ministry of Finance. The Department of Economic Affairs does it. Most of the money that we take from the Ministry of Finance is passed on to the state back to back. That is, whatever we get is passed on as it to the state for its own projects. The government of India bears the currency risk because these loans are normally in US dollars. Sometimes they're in Japanese yen. But when it is paid back, it is paid in the foreign currency. So when our currency depreciates, there's a loss that is normally met by the Ministry of Finance. Can we go to the next slide, please? The major multilateral institutions that we take money from, one is the IBRD, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We call it the World Bank when we talk. The IBRD is part of something called the Bretton Woods institutions. You will be reading about it when you study your economics. It is headed normally by an American. The IMF is its sister organization. We don't take money from IMF for our development projects. That we do from the IBRD, the World Bank. The World Bank also has a soft window, which is with a very minimal cost, which we used to access. India has graduated from that, so we no longer can access it. Because the problem with India's borrowing, like China's borrowing, is because of the size of the country, each project size is so large that if we go and borrow, other countries get crowded out, the smaller countries. So there's a country limit to the amount we can borrow from the IBRD and also from the next bank, that's the Asian Development Bank. The Asian Development Bank was set up along the lines of the IBRD. It is a Japanese bank in the division of how these things are run. IBRD is all, and IMF have always had American heads. The ADB has had a Japanese head. It was basically, it does a lot, looks over its shoulder at what Japan is doing. These are the old banks. These are the banks of the 1950s and the 1960s. India is a founder member of both banks and is a very vocal member of the board. We also have constituencies on their board where our executive directors sit. The other two banks are the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the New Development Bank. These are two banks that India was very actively associated with the setting up of. They were set up only in the last 10 to 15 years. They came up because as a developing country, India found that when it wanted infrastructure loans, one of the problems with going to the ADB or the World Bank is they have something called safeguards, social safeguards, environment, number of women employed, the kind of care you take of the labor, the kind of compensation you pay for the land you're buying. All these are the social safeguards to protect the public from the heavy hand of the government. This is very good in principle and in practice, but the problem is when you take a loan from these organizations, their safeguard specialists would come in and do an assessment of the project. This could take months at a time. They'd do a public consultation, etc., and it would add to the costs because most of the consultants are very highly paid consultants, mostly from the developed countries. India found this very, very onerous because we said our laws and our systems are among the best in the world. Until it was watered down a few years ago, India's environment law, for instance, stood shoulder to shoulder with the best environment laws in the world. So we said, yes, there can be a problem of implementation of an act or a law. That is something that we have to address through administration. But when we have good, robust country laws, you should go by what we are doing. It took us years of negotiation and started with the ADB. I was then director ADB when we did this in the 2002 to 2006, and then we won. They changed their practices to say that in countries with robust laws, they will go only by the country laws. Monitoring will be done to ensure that the safeguards are met, but this reduced our costs of borrowing. And also by then, India had developed a lot of consultants with expertise in this, so we started taking them. But still, the cost was much higher than we could do if we could source money from elsewhere. So we said, why can't we have specialist banks that are not run by the developed countries? They're run for emerging markets and the developed country. That's how the AIIB and the NDB came in. NDB was a child of the BRICS. BRICS is no longer relevant, but NDB came up with that. Both of them are headquartered in Shanghai. It was a decision that was taken, but India serves on the rotating presidency. We had the NDB when it was set up. The first president was Mr. Kamath from India. I think now it has moved to some other country. It's a rotational thing. We'll keep getting it back. The last bank that I put in brackets is the European Investment Bank. It is not a multilateral bank. It is a commercial bank, but it is also a bank from which we have started accessing loans for infrastructure. For instance, the Kanpur Metro is funded by an EIB loan. It has more commercial terms than the other banks, whereas the AIIB, NDB, etc. are quicker and they give us costs which are slightly better than you go and get from the IBRD, the ADB. There are also two other multilateral banks you should be aware of. One is the AFDB. F should be a lowercase, that's my mistake. The African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, that's the Latin American bank. India is a member in that our consultants can bid for contracts there, but we're not active on that and we don't have constituencies over there. Then I'm giving you next slide. I've given you, no, the next slide, please, Jaika. Yeah, this is when I talk about bilateral borrowing. When you have a country-to-country arrangement, we currently have this country-to-country arrangement with major countries like Japan. We have it with the UK. We have it with the US, and that is sometimes they're strategic more than in terms of size. Because, for instance, USA hardly gives us anything. DFID, the UK's development agency, hardly gives us anything. It's mostly to NGOs. Japan's JICA is a very major funder. You would have heard about the high-speed rail that we're getting on the West Coast. That is JICA funded. There is a problem over here. There's a term that you'll come across very often that is called ODA, Official Development Assistance. The OECD, the organization which is headquartered in Europe, is a club for the developed countries of the world. Korea is also part of it. The OECD guides how OECD functions vis-a-vis the rest of the world, that is a not so developed world, including in what is defined as ODA, where they say that every country has to provide official development assistance to the developing countries. This was one of the planks of the OECD. It worked very well for a long time. All the ODA that was coming in from the official agencies of those countries were coming into our countries, but there's a catch. There's something called a tied loan. When you come in with ODA, if I am coming in from the UK and I'm telling India, this is the money I'm giving you, but you will have to source all your consultants, your equipment, everything from my country, that is UK, because I want to give business also to my country. Tied loans were one of the standard features of ODA. And a study was done, and it was found that a tied loan can add between 12 to 30% to the cost of a project because you're taking it from a more expensive place. Why should I take things from the UK when I can probably get them either in my neighborhood or from India itself? All the developing countries objected to this. There's something called a Paris Club where these things are discussed. Then finally, the OECD took a policy decision that you should not have tied loans. You should give it up. All the major countries have given it up. Japan still has an element of tied loans. We are still required to take a certain amount of the project loans that we take. We have to source things from Japan. We have negotiated with them very hard, especially when, for instance, about 15 years ago, there was a solar grid coming up in Neemrana, that is in Rajasthan, where there was a Japanese township. And we objected to how they said that. I think it was either Hitachi or someone had to give all the equipment. We said, look, we have manufacturers in India who can provide this. So Japan also has to, their official agency has to answer to its own parliamentary setup. And there's a reluctance to give something for free without them getting any benefit. We found a via media. I won't go into it in detail just now. Maybe in the question and answer I can tell you. We found a way around it, which is more optics than anything else. But it is important for us because we try and access our money from the bilateral sources in large amounts and also with slightly easier conditions of borrowing than we can get when we go to another country. We sign memorandums of understanding with these countries, which guide how we are going to do it. Could we have the next slide, please? Yeah. As I had showed you in an earlier slide, the amount of money that we can borrow from countries like Japan is limited because Japan doesn't have an open purse to give us money. It is also working in other developing countries. It also wants to come in where it can get business. So it will love to do foreign direct investment, etc., which have nothing, they're not government to government, they're business, where it gets more business for itself. Multilateral banks have country limits. We have reached the country limits, ceilings for both the World Bank and the ADB. And now they are very careful in the kind of loans they give us because they cannot crowd out other countries. Once India takes money like China used to do, China has graduated out of that, that money is not available for any other country. So what happens is when we take that kind of money, we not only pay back the loan and the interest on the loan, we also pay back something called the commitment charges. That is because we are committing to a project, we pay them a fee for keeping that money. It isn't as if the World Bank and the ADB are putting it separately, but it's just that in its own earmarking of funds, this is no longer available for any other country. So we pay them a commitment fee. This adds to our cost of borrowing from these countries. Like I said, both in the ADB and the World Bank, we no longer can access their soft loan window. We try and do it for some rural and agriculture projects, but again, those are very small amounts because the bulk of the money is meant for the poorer countries, maybe African countries, the Pacific nations, etc. When we were faced with this, we realized that it's becoming a huge problem for us to mobilize money. If you go out into the markets abroad and try to borrow, your cost of borrowing is capped by what is called the sovereign rating. There are international rating agencies which assess each country annually and give it a rating. India, because of the stage it is at, never gets into the top AAA rating. We are at best in the Bs and the Cs. Every time you jump, these are alphabetically given ratings. Every time you move up a notch in that, the cost of borrowing becomes cheaper because this is based on the risk in a country. Because we are not in that investment category, investable category, we are slightly at the upper end of the B section, which is not risk-free, which is good, but we still have to pay an extra cost. We can't go above the sovereign rating. The sovereign rating caps it because in the end, the sovereign is the ultimate last resort for any kind of borrowing. When we saw this, we realized that we can't go out and borrow in the markets abroad because of this. It'll be a very, very expensive way of getting money. So we said, how can we come up with innovative ways of raising money from whether it's the Indian private sector, corporate sector, or from abroad? The first thing that we did is public-private partnerships, PPPs. What is public-private partnerships? It's basically the private sector and the public sector coming together to fund something, a project, where the money is not given by government. The private partner in a good, ideal stage comes in with his own money. When a private partner comes in, he's not Mother Teresa. He's not coming in for charity. He's coming in because he expects to get a profit. He's got shareholders also that he answers to. From government side, when we invite the private sector in, we are inviting the private sector in only because we don't have the luxury of having money of our own to fund all the infrastructure that we need. But when we invite the private sector in, we're also going to try and beat down the profit margin to the point where it makes sense in terms of the value of money, the net present value of money, to allow him that profit so that 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, when the infrastructure asset is returned to us, we feel that, yes, we have actually benefited from this. Theoretically, this sounds very good. How does it work in practice? When you first hear about PPPs, your instinctive reaction, and a lot of people have, there's a lot of bad press for PPPs because a bad PPP is much worse than a bad, just a moment, there's some pop-ups coming in. Ms. Desikan, it tells me it sounds like you might have switched to a different language. I thought I was talking English. Anyway, okay. So what happens in a public-private partnership is you have to be very careful about the knowledge you have as a public sector servant when you enter into a PPP, because the private sector comes with a wealth of information of financing, of legal implications, etc., which we in the government normally don't have. For us, it's a very straightforward thing. Contractors come in and do work, and then they go out and they give us the asset. In a public-private partnership, it's not like this. Your public-private partnership basically is a place where you're calling in the private sector and you're conceding your right to provide some infrastructure asset through a concession. You're conceding it, so you call it a concession. These concessions run from anywhere between 10 years to even 40 to 50 to 60 years in large things like airports. What this means in practical terms is party A comes in, funds that infrastructure asset in something called greenfield assets, that is new assets that are being set up, like the New Delhi airport that was set up, the Mumbai airport that was set up. The land is given to them. They build that infrastructure. They operate it on a lease. And then at the end of the concession period, they transfer it back to the government. One difference between PWD or a government providing this asset and PPP doing it. When that asset comes back in 10 years, 30 years, 60 years, our concession agreement mandates that the condition of that asset should be as good as it was in the beginning, which means that the maintenance costs that the party has to put in to maintain those standards are huge. Okay. His initial construction cost, his maintenance costs, his operation costs mean that his margins are very thin. He gets very low profit in this. To ensure that he gets a low profit, he gets a profit, but it's the lowest. What we have to do in public-private partnerships is go in for public bidding. The party that you choose in a public-private partnership should be through open competition. Market-driven competition is the best solution we have found in today's capitalistic approach to determine prices. This could have problems, especially when you have monopoly players. For instance, one of the things that normal caveats we put is no party should have more than 5 or 6 major assets in a sector. For instance, you don't want one party to own all the airports. You don't want one party to own all the ports. You don't want one party to own all the roads. Owning meaning during the period of the lease, because if something goes wrong, everything will come crashing down. But more important, if you have a monopoly power coming and doing this, for the government, it is a price risk. We may be paying much more than we should. India started this PPP partnership in the around 2003, in 2004 to 2006, it decided to mainstream public-private partnerships because the urgency for getting money was huge. The Department of Economic Affairs set up a PPP cell and we mainstreamed it through the states and the center. You would have heard of the magazine called The Economist. The Economist has an economist intelligence unit, a secret organization of theirs, which does a lot of work in research. It does a secret survey every year on the readiness for infrastructure in different countries. And by 2012, it was heartening to know that India was ranked #1 in Asia and #3 in the world in readiness for PPP and maturity of PPP projects. This is because we did so much groundwork, building up the capacity of everyone across public sector and private sector, including in the private sector where people could develop it, which is why today when you see the good roads, they're done at a quality which is much higher than the standard thing that we used to have earlier. Wherever you see bad roads, right now on the social media, you will see that, for instance, in one state in India, bridges are collapsing almost every week. In another state, on the other side of India, you're finding that roads that were inaugurated with a lot of fanfare 6 months ago, 3 months ago, have huge potholes even before the monsoons. This is the fault of two people. I would put it squarely on the public sector, not on the private sector. If corruption increases, corruption means that the private sector is taking away money that should go to a project to line the pockets of someone else. So we have to be very alert to ensure that money is not leaking in the system. 2, as public sector, when I'm giving a project to the private sector, one of the main things I have to do is monitoring. I have to ensure standards. Public-private partnerships have very, very onerous conditions where if something goes wrong, the private party he will be bled through his nose if he doesn't correct it. If we don't monitor it, he gets away with it. So any failure on that is a public sector thing. Because we have a paucity of time, I'm not getting more into PPPs, but I'll also tell you a little bit of other things that we did. One is PPPs going out, private sector coming in. A lot of cases, because of the kind of projects we had where the private sector couldn't get his own money, and they also go to the banks, incidentally, to borrow. We've had some kind of hybrid PPPs also, which is too much. You don't need to get into detail at this stage of your preparation. We set up something called the InvITs, Infrastructure Investment Trusts. These are a roaring success. And in fact, they're the only things that have succeeded, REITs and InvITs, in infrastructure in the last 10 years. When a private party comes in and he builds a road or he builds an airport, he's locked into that contract for about 30 years. Most of the people who build these roads are not made for this. They want to get out. So InvITs, the Infrastructure Investment Trusts, are a way for him to, like mutual funds, he sells off parts of this. Long-term funds come in, the pension funds, insurance funds come, etc., and they manage these assets. These are doing very well. We are getting billions in investment, including from Canada and Australia, into these. We also set up something called the infrastructure debt funds, which the private sector goes and raises bonds outside and uses it for infrastructure. They're doing fairly well. Municipal bonds. These are something that we've always experimented with. We had an earlier version which didn't succeed, but the latest version of municipal bonds actually looks at how cities can raise money. The country which has the most successful municipal bonds in the world is the US. They're called the munis over there, but they have some kind of a backing of the local government. In India, we wanted to do something that didn't put pressure on the central government or the state government. So our version of municipal bonds is slightly different. It's doing very well. The other thing that we did is we set up something called the National Infrastructure Investment Fund. You would have heard of something called sovereign wealth funds. Sovereign wealth funds are set up by countries which are flush with funds to do investments elsewhere. India, we are not flush with funds like, say, Norway is because of its petroleum money, or Saudi Arabia is because of its petroleum exports. But we realized that we needed a specialist organization that can invest in infrastructure. We had these ICICI, etc., in about 30, 40 years ago with the development banks that we have, but they've all become private sector. We didn't have another private, dedicated infrastructure bank, so the NIIF was set up. The money that has come in here, apart from seed funding from the government of India, is from the huge funds of Saudi Arabia, etc. They are supposed to go out and invest in infrastructure. Unfortunately, they have not done much of that. Various reasons for this. Part of it is because the people who are handling it seem to have a slightly limited understanding of where they should be going, and also something called risk. My last part of this is no longer a slide dependent. I'm going to talk to you about two areas which have become very topical of now. One is infrastructure in the times of climate change. Two, the responsibility of government to cope with rapid changes in what's happening in the infrastructure world. First, let's start with climate change. Any bit of infrastructure that you provide is going to harm the environment. Whether you build a road, will you build an airport, anything like that, you're going to hurt the environment. So it's a trade-off. By not providing this infrastructure, if I'm hurting the growth story more, a conscious decision is taken that, yes, knowing fully well that this may hurt the environment, I'm still taking this decision because the positive externalities are so huge that it pays to provide this infrastructure. Sometimes this gets distorted. And in this last section, I'm going to talk of things that cause me a lot of anguish, because as an Indian, I want India to be at the top of everything that we're doing that is good for the world. In climate, the problem is anything that India does has repercussions outside of India. If there's pollution, it goes across the borders. It has one of the largest externality impacts in the world. I'm also going to give you examples from countries which have coped with this. Some are our peers, some are not our peers. China is one example, which I'll tell you. China started off as one of the most polluting economies in the world at the time of its Olympics, the Beijing Olympics. It had gray skies. Beijing had smog. You couldn't see beyond your nose. By that time, China decided that its reputational risk was getting huge. People were talking in very derogatory terms about China. So it decided to clean up its act. If you were to see Beijing today, it took about 15 years. Beijing has among the bluest skies in the world. This comes on the back of a lot of decisions that China took, which even today people question. One of the biggest ones that is something called the Three Gorges Dam. It is a mammoth dam that it built over 3 rivers. It's supposed to have affected livelihoods. It's hurt a lot of the silt formation in rivers downstream. It has hurt a lot of the wildlife. But today, the Three Gorges Dam has contributed to the greening, because China has the largest greening program in the world, including in the desert. It's greening it in a marvelous way. So China went through this phase where it was the biggest polluter, and it was destroying the environment. And I think it has destroyed a lot of its wildlife. But now it has moved into almost a developed country phase where it is protecting the environment. It has also seen the largest rollout of renewables across the world. The graph that shows you how many renewable power projects are being built is it has a lovely slope. If you were to remove China from it, it would be almost a flat line. That shows how much China is contributing to it. In India, we have had something called for the infrastructure development, we have something called a compensatory fund that is called CAMPA for managing afforestation whenever we destroy something. The tragedy of India is we don't use the CAMPA funds, they're languishing. The other thing is, sometimes in India, in a urgency to provide infrastructure and to gallop through the development cycle, we are tending to take a lot of shortcuts. pressure is put on the Environment Ministry, which is supposed to be the guardian of the environment, to give clearances where clearances should not be given. And for this, I will give the example, for instance, on what is being done on Nicobar. All of you would have read about the Nicobar project, which is coming up. They are going to be destroying over 1 lakh primary forest in a tropical and tropical temperate region, absolutely pristine. And the compensatory afforestation is proposed to be done 1,500 miles away in the Aravalli Hills of Northwest India, where the kind of forests that you have are dry deciduous. In terms of, you would have heard of the carbon sink and the oxygen thing. Imagine a primary forest in a tropical region being destroyed, and you have a deciduous or arid forest over here. How the Environment Ministry gave this doesn't make sense to me. There's a lot of debate going on, and this is something that is important for you as future policymakers, because when you're taking decisions like this, sometimes you have to do it without wondering what are going to be the repercussions in terms of your popularity. Policymakers are not there in the job to become popular. They're there to get the things done in the best way for the country and for the people in the country. So you have to take a stand. It may be unpopular, but it helps, because if you take the stand, you would not be facing things like, when you look at India, the holiest part of India, and I think I'm a South Indian, but even I would say, for me, when I see the Himalayas, something happens. Maybe it's in my DNA. I can't explain how. I've seen all the major ranges of the world, the Rockies, the Andes, the Alps, etc. And without any nationalistic fervor, I can just say that something with the Himalayas is different. It is supposed to be the only region in the world where the sages, the ancient sages, are probably still there in isolation. We had started this with an invocation. And one of the things in the Vedic system is, when you go to places of worship which have some kind of sanctity which we don't understand, the closer you get, the harder it becomes. You have to go through that kind of an arduous journey to reach those places. That's how the Vedic philosophy teaches us this. So for me to see people zooming in helicopters, building a 6-lane high-speed highway to the Char Dham projects, etc., it just doesn't make sense to me. Because what you're doing is, you're destroying one of the most sensitive ecological bases in the world. You're also taking people who don't have that thought structure there, so they go and they pollute. Look at the Himalayas today. You would feel ashamed when you go. Every time, because religious tourism has become a big thing, every time you go there, you will see plastic everywhere. This gives infrastructure a bad name. It isn't the road that is a problem. It is where the road was located, how it is being used, and by whom it is being used. The second thing is, in our ease, and this is where Dr. Amon had spoken about my care for animals. Those of you who are on the social media, if you have the stomach for it, please go and see yesterday in one of the Himalayan regions, one of our great pilgrims who doesn't have the energy or the the will to walk up to that dham, sits on a horse. The horse collapses and he's saved. And that horse, they've shown this, and it's heartbreaking to say, is going hurtling down that snowy slope to its death. This is not what Vedic civilization and Hinduism is not about. And this is not what infrastructure is about. So one of the policy things that we have to choose when we are developing infrastructure is, where is it required? At what cost are we providing it? And who is it going to benefit most? And in 2024, one of the things that we also have to think about is not just human beings. We have to think of nature around us and the animal world. So please keep this in mind as future civil servants. When you join the civil service, don't ignore this. And the other thing that we have to think of is cost of infrastructure. You would be reading a lot of criticism in the papers of, people now, especially in social, it's taxpayer money that is being used. In the end, all money is taxpayer money. What we look at is getting your bang for the buck. Is this money that is being spent being used well? So when you pay for a toll road, you're paying for good infrastructure. as countries move up the cycle of development, the citizens learn to pay for better infrastructure. In welfare states, including in Scandinavia, the infrastructure is paid for. Similarly, in the US also. But what you expect with this is when you pay, you expect better service. So when you pay for a highway toll, you expect that the highway is excellent. The problem that occurs is when the public is whipped into a frenzy saying you should not be paying for this, government should be giving it free. No, government cannot. Government has limited resources. And when you find people going and breaking down the toll plazas, beating up the toll players, etc., there's not a problem of infrastructure. Infrastructures and PPPs get a very bad name for this. This is not their problem. It is a problem of law and order in the states. Law and order is an administrative problem that has to be tackled separately. A lot of states are now setting up infrastructure and PPP laws. Earlier, I used to be of the school that felt that it wasn't required. Then I was talking to some of the people who started out in this, and everyone feels now that we need the law to protect our assets, because if you don't have a law, there'll be a lot of policy changes which are whimsical, which are not good, because every time you have policy changes in something like infrastructure, this hurts the investment that is coming in. The more you hurt investment, the less infrastructure we can provide. So what we need is consistency in decision making and legal durability. The agreements that we sign have to be very good. The problem that India has is in implementation of contract and our court systems. A lot of the infrastructure assets are caught up in endless arbitrations and in the court system. One of the policy things that we thought of around 2016 was whether we should have a separate set of infrastructure courts which are dedicated to this, like for commercial disputes, so that we don't slow down the pace of infrastructure provision. The finance minister then was Mr. Jaitley, and we drew up everything, but for other reasons it couldn't come through. So one of the things that we need to discuss is, as a country, do we need something like that? I'm going to, Mr. Desikan, with your permission, I will stop now because I'm coming out with a very bad cough and cold, so my throat is hurting. I'll take a short break, and if you could have Q&A, and including from Dr. Ramohan, etc., I can elaborate on a lot of things, including examples I'll give you from of Indians who are working abroad in infrastructure, good ones and bad ones, and of foreigners who've come and worked in India. I can give you those examples of infrastructure also and how it helps us.
Sure, ma'am. Sure, ma'am. Please take some, give some rest to your throat now. I'm sorry to say that. Any questions? Do you have any questions, please? You can unmute and ask if... Okay, so we have 2-3 questions from our students.
Yeah.
This is from Deekshita. Yes, Ramoji.
Just I wanted to say something, not ask a question. You're all aspirants for civil service. I am sure that all of you are going to pass. But then, how a civil servant should be at the lower level, junior level and senior level, it is now exemplified by Sharmila. What a beautiful clarity of use she has got. What a beautiful communication ability, and what a commitment she has got. What we expect from civil servants tomorrow is the qualification, is the combination, a symbiosis of all these elements. So not only learn the subject from her, also we should learn how to be an effective civil servant. I am very happy that she has given the lecture today in all its better aspects, and I hope we will be able to listen more from her in future.
Thank you so much, sir.
That's only an amendment. Only one comment, that's all. Anybody wants to ask questions, they can come ahead.
We have a question. Excellent. We have questions from our students sitting in the classroom. So the first question is, what are the key challenges faced in implementing large-scale infrastructure projects in India, and how are they being addressed by the government and private sector stakeholders? This is by Deekshita.
Would you like me to answer each question separately, or would you like me?
No, I think you should combine all, because it will be repetitive.
Okay.
Okay. So next is, will public-private partnership infrastructure work efficiently for public needs? This is by Deepak, our student. And the next question by Dikshita is, how do socio-cultural factors unique to India influence the decision-making process and outcomes in large-scale infrastructure development projects within the country? And do you want me to read more questions, ma'am?
Is there any repetition in the others? Otherwise, I can take this and then go on to that. I've noted down these. So your call.
Yeah, it has just come. I have to go through this.
Okay, let me then start with this while you're doing that.
Okay.
I'll take them in the order that they were asked.
Now,
What is the problems or the challenges faced by infrastructure and how they're being faced, right?
yeah.
How they're being
Based in implementing large-scale infrastructure projects.
Okay. Infrastructure by itself is a very difficult sector to work in, because one of the things that you'll find is, I'll give you the simplest example for your understanding, linear projects. A linear project is something that goes like this, like a road, okay, from one point to another. It's not like a port which is at a place. One of the major problems that we faced in linear projects, which also harmed a lot of the initial PPPs, is land acquisition. In India, we have different types of land that is owned. Like, for instance, in the Northeast, when you're providing roads, in Northeast, in some states, land is owned by the community. The entire village owns it. In, say, a state like mine, that is Telangana, or in Andhra Pradesh, or in even Tamil Nadu, land is owned either by the government or by the private sector. So there you're negotiating with a different set of people. Acquiring land is governed by some compensation rules, how much you pay. Government land is okay. Government land you can always acquire. That's it's called the sovereign right, and you get it. The acquisition of land, Land Acquisition Act, makes it legal to also acquire private land. In the West, it's called eminent domain. That is, the government has the top tier. It's right to acquire this for the public good. In India, land acquisition, and when I talk of land acquisition, I'm talking about land that is being acquired from the private parties, goes through a process where it is notified. Then the responsibility is with the district magistrate. He decides based on the circle rate, etc., etc. It takes a long time. There are sometimes legal challenges. Even in a place like a country like China, where they have community ownership of land, even there have been holdouts. So what happens is, suppose I feel that if I wait, I'll get a better price. I can do something called holdout. Everyone around me has sold their land, but I am a holdout. So there are laws also to overcome this for compulsory acquisition, which is through the Land Acquisition Act. This is one of the major problems. The other problem is expertise of the people who are building the asset. We have a lot of contractors in India. We don't have a lot of developers. In infrastructure, you need development, because it is not setting up, constructing something like a dam, etc. It's also doing the operations. Initially, when we started, we didn't have this. So we've had to slowly nurture a class of developers. Most of them were contractors who become developers. Like, for instance, if you see the top airports, they're built by GMR. That is an Andhra company. GMR started off as I think a PWD or some roads contractor. He's now built the largest airports in the world, including in Istanbul, in Greece, in the Philippines. They're all GMR airports that are being built. Getting these people is a challenge, because once you have a certain set of projects, you have to find new people, because these people don't have enough money to come and put there, even for their own loans. The third is the kind of damage you're doing to the surroundings. So in big infrastructure project, those are the basics. I can speak for 2 hours on what the other problems are. But if you look at that, the basic problem underlying all this is, where does the money come from? In India, public sector banks also have limited amounts. The private sector banks that we have in India are not really into infrastructure. They have a few odd cases here and there. Bulk of the financing of infrastructure in India is done by the public sector banks, unlike in the US, where the private sector does a lot of the funding. We are more like Australia, And in principle, though you keep hearing arguments that we should get banks out, I feel in India, public sector banks are best suited for infrastructure lending, and we should continue with that. But the basic other problem in infrastructure is, you hear a term when you get into construction and infrastructure called shovel-ready projects. That is, you get the money, you get the clearances, etc. You should be able to take a shovel, dig, and start working. Infrastructure never works like that. For instance, when you're building a road, suppose it's a 200-kilometer road, you also have to get utilities, like for instance, lights, water, etc. So you can't do this if it's a 4-year project. You can't take the land, sit, and then say, I'm going to do it over the next 4 years. That will become very expensive. You start building, and then slowly you develop it. So when you make your contracts, when you're planning, etc., planning of infrastructure is a huge challenge. For the last 15 years, I'm in hardcore infrastructure. People talk about there's no money in infrastructure. I keep telling people, you show me a good infrastructure project, I will stake my life on it, I'll get you the money. A good project, there's no dearth of money. It is for projects that are not structured well that cause you problems in getting money. So one of the major challenges is how you structure your project. Take time. It doesn't matter if it's slow. It's better to do a slow, well-structured project than to do something which causes you problems. A lot of the shortcuts that are being resorted to now, for whatever reason, there's pressure on people to provide something, to inaugurate something. That's what is resulting in poor quality infrastructure. You can't expend so much money, 1,000 crores, 900 crores on a project which is developing leaks within the first rains that it sees, because the cost to the economy is too much. Every time you are wasting money like this, the effect on rehabilitating that infrastructure and putting more in it, it is criminal. It is absolutely criminal, and this hurts. So basically, the challenge is in structuring projects well, choosing the right partners, and monitoring. These are the 3 things. And always remembering that infrastructure, you need a lot of patience. It is not like other things where you can get money quickly. So there's a term that is normally used. It needs patient capital. So these are the 2 things that you have to marry together. And use people who take advice from people who know the subject. That is also lacking very often. The second question was, PPP for, sorry, what was the question? For public needs. Was that the question, Mr. Deskan? What was the exact question? I've just noted PPP for public needs.
Public-private partnership in infrastructure work efficiently for public needs. Does it work efficiently for public needs?
Yeah. PPPs in infrastructure are taken up precisely for public needs. Unlike other countries, in India, we have a system where it is not bad. It may not be very efficient, but it is almost a bottoms-up projection of what you need. It isn't as if someone sitting in Delhi is saying that in Chennai, you need such and such a road, you need such and such a bridge, you need such and such a sewage pipeline. No, it is Chennai itself which is saying this. Normally, in an efficient system, you'll go through your MLA, your panchayat in a rural area, your MP or whatever. In a democratic system where your vote counts, most of the requirements for infrastructure are projected from the ground level. There will always be 1 or 2 bad cases. Forget that. It happens in all countries. You've seen it in Kenya just now, where an Indian party is, the Kenyan airport is now under siege because the people say we won't let that Indian party do it. It's a PPP contractor who's got this contract. The reason was the PPP contract was suggested by this party to the government, the Kenyan government. The party went and said, you need this airport. So it was something that he himself sponsored. Is something called there's a Swiss challenge system, which is very bad. We don't go in for that here. Most of our requirements are projected from what is needed, a bridge is needed, etc. The MP lads and the MLA lads funds also provide for this, but anything that is large normally requires more funds. So it is the public needs which demand that infrastructure asset. Because the government is not able to provide it and wants to put the money somewhere else, it goes in for a PPP. That is how normally projects are decided. We had something called a waterfall method for roads that was used for PPPs. This basically meant that the first hurdle, you have a project, you first see if it's PPPable or not. What does PPPable mean? PPPable means that will it make some revenues on its own that will give the profit so that the government doesn't have to pay the profits from its pocket. If it is PPPable, that is if it's a viable project, then you go for something called a build, operate, transfer, where the party comes in with his own money and then he makes his money by whatever way. If it is not PP people, then we use something where we pay part of the money, we give him some kind of viability gap funding, etc. So yes, PPP projects are meant only for public needs, and they are meant only to cater to the public needs. And in a PPP project, you do not monitor where the party has got his money from, who is the contractor he's using. Unlike in a government project, you'll see open competition. Once the person has got it, the lowest L1 is getting it. In a PPP contract, once someone has won the bid and I've given him, I don't care if his dog, his cat, his wife, his daughter, his mother, or his husband or her husband is doing the contract, because their source of financing and how they price their financing is something that is opaque to me. What I measure is service standards, the public need. Very stringent service standards, and they're called key performance indicators. The KPIs are put in a contract. Monitoring and ensuring that he pays a penalty if it's not done are very important. So that, yes, it is meant only for public needs. The last is socio-cultural influences which are unique to India. Not just in India, everywhere where you set up a PPP or project, you have to see what the local population is. When in 2014, when this government came, when the current government in India came in Delhi, it said that we're going to call it PPPP, where the personal thing of the public comes into the picture. The reason it was said was because there was a feeling that the public requirements are not being taken into effect in this, but that's actually wrong. They are consulted a lot. The socio-cultural things are things like, for instance, in Rajasthan, girl children don't go to school. It has a very sparse population. Its population density is very low. We found that girl children weren't going to schools. The reason is, unlike, say, in South India, where people are ready to send their girl children even to hostels, in Rajasthan, the cultural ethos at that point was such that they wouldn't send the girls outside. So then we came up with a scheme. There's a PPP project we have where girls could come and study and go back. When you're dealing with something like, say, rural Telangana, where you have a fairly large amount of Muslims also staying, normally Muslim girls they don't go out, etc. We were very surprised to find that a state government project which set up dedicated hostels for minority and reserved community, marginalized communities for their girl children, including Muslims, they sent them there because they saw that education is the way to get out of their poverty cycle. So from Rajasthan to Telangana, you find there's a sea change, whereas you would instinctively, if you were to read a textbook, you would think, no, conservatism is conservatism. Similarly, cultural differences could come in how a road is accessed. When you're building bypasses, what are the kind of things that are there in that place which require this kind of access? These are things that are done in the planning stage, again, in a good planning stage. If you're doing it in a rush and not doing it well, then you would hurt this. Northeast. In Northeast, where even the marketing is done in a community area, including, say, in a Sikkim or something, the way that you will build the infrastructure for marketing is very different from how you would do it in a Maharashtra or one of the more advanced states like Tamil Nadu or states which have good infrastructure. So these things do play in. Next, those are the three questions I took initially.
Yeah, ma'am, next is, there is a question on the chat box. Why can't we go for decentralized and society-based infrastructure projects currently, ma'am?
We do have a decentralized system. There are different categories of projects. You have the very small projects which can be done. Again, it's all, in the end, everything comes down to money. If you have a small project, like it's building a small, say, a road, a kacha road to a pond in a rural area, maybe your panchayat could find the funds for it. Maybe your local MLA could find the funds for it, and the panchayat says, we want this, and they do it. As the project, then you have other projects which are funded by the states. The other projects which are funded by the center. There are different kinds of partnerships between the center and the state. So in roads, again, roads is the easiest because that's most common for us. You have state roads, you have rural roads, you have national highways. So Decentralized decisions are taken on what you require there and you project it upwards, but there has to be a decision-making body. You can't have chaos that everyone says, I want this and I'm going to do this. So even in your decentralized financing at the local levels, that whether you have municipalities or at the panchayat level, it is a body that is tasked with the decision-making that takes the final say on which project will come up. In a bad system, and there would be a lot of municipalities, for instance, in urban areas which are bad, and they're elected bodies. In a bad system, it won't function well. But in a good system, this is how it's done. The amendment to the Constitution to provide powers to the local bodies was one of the most far-reaching amendments to the Indian Constitution. And if used well, it could be a game changer. It is used in some places extremely well. So yes, it is used.
And Agalya, you want to unmute and ask your question? Please unmute and ask your question.
Yes, sir. Ma'am, as you said, the role of public-private partnership enhancing the infrastructure development in India. So what are the potential advantages and the disadvantages of this model, ma'am?
Okay, I'll give it very briefly because it's a very detailed subject. The advantages in most cases is government doesn't have to provide money. So government can put its money in something that will not attract the private sector. Some social sector projects, if you're going in for social sector projects, a disaster in a social sector project is worse than in a hard physical sector. For instance, if in a hospital, if something goes wrong, you have death, right? So very often, UK has also experimented with this, getting the private sector into a social sector infrastructure. You'd have to do it with a lot of caution. If you don't have enough money, you would rather put it into health and education, the money that you have, and let someone else come in with the funding. So that is one great advantage. Two is the standards. When the private sector comes in, because he or she is coming in for a profit, the standards that the public sector demands for that infrastructure are way higher than you would demand from a standard building, say a public works department building or a road, etc. Very, very stringent standards. Again, this has to be monitored by the public sector. People get transferred, so they tend not to do it, but this is the other major advantage. The third thing is, in the end, there is a partnership. You have to get the private sector partnering with the government, because over the decades, as government shrinks and moves out of all these areas, you're going to have the private sector come in. For India, there's nowhere, we are not anywhere near that. But partnering with the public sector will also give them a certain degree of confidence. They still don't have it, certain degree of confidence that we are meeting as equals. Equals where always the public sector has the edge. I mean, there's no question that the public sector has the edge, because the public sector is the guardians of the public good, right? But otherwise, this is the major advantage. You can basically get things done faster than you would if you were waiting for money to come from the government. That's one of the major advantages for India.
Ma'am, I do have another question also, ma'am.
Yeah. Mr. Deska, is she allowed to, or do you have anyone else? It's Mr. Deska's call.
3 more questions are there, I think.
Okay, so then Ahalya, you can go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, how can India balancing the infrastructure development with environment sustainability?
With what?
Ma'am, how can India balancing the infrastructure development with environment and sustainability?
Okay. First, I'll start with a slightly funny story. And I'm like Dr. Ramon told you, I'm very passionate about the environment, wildlife, animals, etc. One of the problems that we faced in some areas of India is when we did land acquisition for roads, the road would take maybe about 6 months to 8 months to 2 years to be built. Once they knew that this was coming in, encroachments came up alongside the roads. So it became very difficult because you have to move people, etc. So what the NHAI decided was to prevent encroachments along the land that we were going to develop, and we were going to 2-lane, 3-lane, 4-lane. They planted trees to prevent encroachments. Trees flourished, and it was almost like social forestry. When the trees had to be cut down so that the road could be expanded, the NGOs came in and said, you can't, this is destruction of the forest. So this became a very kind of a quaint kind of a problem that India faced. How do you challenge this? But see, again, like I said, as someone who's in infrastructure finance and in infrastructure, I always say that any infrastructure will hurt the environment. Your attempt is to minimize that and also, as far as possible, adopt sustainable practices. one of the advantages of India being very, very low down that curve of provision of infrastructure is we can learn and pick up from other countries and take best practices which actually give us an advantage. For instance, take something as simple as building a tunnel, a road tunnel. Do you know that Australia has a very detailed guidance? Every stage of providing that road tunnel has a sustainability index, and sustainable practices are built into that. India has a very good road standards. We have a book that is published with the road standards for building, etc. If we could take some of those and build it in, we will try and minimize the damage. Sustainability is becoming a huge thing all over the world, and we also want it for people like you, the next generations, etc. We want to protect the environment. So what we try and do is try and adopt practices which are as climate or eco-friendly as possible. Green steel, green cement, all these things are coming up. Right now, they're too expensive for us to provide, but we will slowly get there. In the earlier system, when we used to take a lot of coal, the fly ash, which has a dust problem, fly ash bricks, India started using them for road construction, etc. So it is always a balance. You try and take the best decision you can, looking at the public good that is going to be provided by this service. Do sensible afforestation and greening, not destroying a primary forest in Nicobar and trying to build something in the Aravallis and saying, this is my compensatory afforestation. That, by any standards, doesn't wash. So this area, it's a dilemma, but it's something we have to resolve. Mr. Deskan?
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, next.
We have two questions on railway infrastructure. I will read it out together.
Sure.
What are the challenges in the Department of Railway Infrastructure in India, and how can the dedicated freight corridor project help? And the next one is 1 minute. As India's railway infrastructure is one of the largest in the world, yet modernization has been slow. What are the initiatives taken by government for railway modernization?
You know, we always compare ourselves with China and the railway infrastructure, and we say that China provided X kilometers of new rail track, whereas India gave only so much. Always keep in mind that India already had a legacy of rail when it got its independence. Every single inch of that legacy has been relayed over the years. Railways have a program of maintenance and relaying of track. It's very expensive. You're doing it under running conditions. When trains are operating, we give something called blocks. So whenever you say that we haven't provided enough, no. Caveat it with saying that we've not only replaced our entire old track, fraying infrastructure, but we've also provided new track. The problems that we face basically is money. Two is congested routes. The dedicated freight corridor has been greatly delayed. It should have come up long ago. And I think there's no one better than Dr. Ram Mohan to tell you that the cost escalated from 3-digit figure crores to now it's into thousands of crores, okay, because of the cost delay, time delay. The dedicated freight corridor would do something which was very, very crucial. Right now, our passenger trains have timetables. Our freight trains don't have a timetable. There's something called a path, a term we use in the railways. You find the path for the goods train in between the passenger trains, which means there's no certainty of when your freight is going to reach you. So as a businessman, if I'm booking something, I can't live with this uncertainty of will it come today, will it come tomorrow, because the railways is not giving you a fixed time for when you're going to get it. This is a terrible thing to happen. In most of our money earnings comes from freight traffic, and we keep increasing the rates for these. When you're paying so much, you expect a service. Like in the US, freight traffic is what pays that skeletal rail that they have. The dedicated freight corridor was to have addressed this. You have the ports connecting. It's a trade route, basically. And once you take the freight traffic off the passenger routes, the congested routes, there's a quadrilateral and there's a diagonal, etc. The passengers services can be provided with efficiency, and freight traffic will be provided with efficiency. One of the mistakes that they did when they were planning this, and we tried to tell them also, is the dedicated freight corridor is a set set of tracks, you have to have feeder routes also being addressed. That is slowly being done. But once the dedicated freight corridor comes in and works as it should, then freight traffic, freight costs will go down. Logistics costs in India are about 14%, which is a good 6 to 8% higher than in advanced economies. We need to get down our logistics costs to improve our growth and to our competition. So that's how that's how it will help. These others. What was the second question on the railways, Mr. Deskan?
1 minute, ma'am.
One was on the DFC and this, and the other.
Yeah. Other one is, as India's railway infrastructure is one of the largest in the world, yet modernization has been slow.
Modernization. Okay. The modernization, we have a program, and contrary to public opinion, the modernization is being done constantly. But when you do it in operating conditions, that is, the trains still have to run, it becomes a challenge. The signals and telecom that we have is among the most advanced in the world. In fact, the Indian Railways is the only system which trains S&T engineers in railway working, with the result that a lot of them are poached by other countries and taken away after we do the training. So the S&T and the route relay interlocking, etc., is being done everywhere. But again, it's a challenge of the finances that we have and how much time we can block. A mega block is something where all services are stopped. The traffic operations people hate that because that means that everything comes to a standstill. So we try to do as much work as we can in the mega block, and it is systematically being done all across. There are challenges still, and in a lot of areas where we are rushing through with trying to put in more higher speed trains, we find that the track still hasn't been upgraded. So it's basically a challenge of the money and the time and the plan. You have plans and don't keep changing them. That's the other thing.
Desikanji, we can limit the questions.
Hello. Damodaran.
Okay.
Ma'am, can we take 2 more questions?
Yeah, and then we can call it a day.
1 minute. Why there is an increase in collapse of bridges and dams in India nowadays, ma'am?
And what is the second question? Is it related?
No, it's related to PM Shakti initiative. What are the steps taken to improve logistics and supply chain infrastructure in India and under the PM Shakti initiative? Okay, the first one about why bridges are collapsing, why roads are developing potholes, why tunnels which are inaugurated at the top level are fraying, etc. It comes from one, perhaps too much pressure put on the people who were tasked with this, and they, instead of realistically telling the higher authorities how much time and resources are needed, they didn't. So it's a failure on their part. I would always put the blame on the authorities, the public sector, because the public servant is supposed to do this, is to take a stand. It doesn't matter if you're transferred, etc. The second would be, if there are leakages in the system, any money that is not being put into the project and is going for other kind of things would mean that the person, the contractor, is going to cut costs on the quality of work. So if quality is not monitored, you can't monitor quality, tell him, I want the best, but also ask him to pay you a bribe. These things can't go. It's always either this or that. So quality has to be monitored and try and stem the leakages. Now, I know that a couple of states are more prone to this than the others. It's open to conjecture on why this is happening. The other thing is on the Gati Shakti. See, Gati Shakti in principle is very good. And in fact, in the railways, they've opened Gati Shakti cells also for the railways, and they have it in other places also. Unfortunately, this is something that works very well on paper, but at the ground level, a lot of the links are not being efficiently managed. I'll leave it at that because it'll get into great detail, but you can't not have extra people or extra, like this is a problem in the railways also. When you have vacancies at the level of supervisors, it hurts. You can't have people being given more and more tasks saying, you do this, you do this, you do that, because supervision fails. And also at some point then you start
window dressing your achievements because you're more scared of what is going to be said from someone who says, why haven't you achieved this, rather than ensuring the quality. This is basically an administrative problem, but in principle, having something like the Gati Shakti is good because it means that you're thinking along the lines of ensuring that everything, like the supply chain, is smooth, etc. So if it works, it's wonderful. In some places, it is working.
Okay. So then, Damodaran, do you have any? You wanted to say something?
No. It's an excellent session. A lot of questions have been answered.
Yeah.
Despite Madam having problem with her throat. Thank you.
Great.
So, can we conclude, ma'am? Can we close?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful presentation and especially your patience in answering questions. You have taken effort. And there are, as Ramohanji said, there are a lot of things to learn for the aspiring civil service aspirants. There are a lot of qualities that they can learn from you, your dedication and your knowledge and how to present it, everything. And you have covered wide aspects of infrastructure development in India and the finance part of it, funds, everything. So thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for giving your time, spending your time today with our aspirants and sharing your knowledge and experience with them.
My pleasure. And may I thank all of you and especially Dr. Ramohan for giving me the opportunity, and all the best to your students. I hope they do really well in the exams.
Definitely, ma'am. Definitely. I think I hope they will be benefited a lot by this guest lecture today on infrastructure development of India. And I thank Dr. Ram Mohan for suggesting ma'am. He only suggested Shamla ma'am for this guest lecture. This is a wonderful thing. And I thank our director for his encouragement and motivation as always. And I thank all our students and faculty members, the staffs who have been working for this. Thank you so much. And all the people who have come from outside also. Thank you for your patience and attending in attending this guest lecture. And thank you for your participation. All those who have asked questions, everybody. And so thank you so much. We are there always. We will be coming up with another guest lecture. We will inform you about our next guest lecture. So keep in touch with us. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you.
Okay,